Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really going deep into the Greek god Apollo, so multifaceted.
Absolutely.
And you, our listener, you've shown you want to get this stuff, quickly but properly. So we've pulled together a bunch of sources, encyclopedia stuff, mythology sites, the works. The goal is to really get the core of Apollo, find those fascinating bits, but, without drowning in every single detail. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, sounds good. And what jumps out right away is his parentage. It's pretty consistent across the board. Son of Zeus and Leto, twin brother to Artemis.
Right, that part seems settled.
But where he was actually born, that gets a little more interesting. Several places claim him Ephesus to Gyra.
Oh, really? I mostly just hear about Delos.
Exactly. Delos is the big one, the most widely accepted tradition.
And the story of Leto getting there, it's quite something.
Yeah.
Here his jealousy is legendary.
Oh, definitely.
So Leto's being chased all over, can't find anywhere stable to give birth. And this is where Delos comes in, and it gets really wild. He was a floating island.
That's the story. Adrift. Sometimes even underwater, apparently. It only became fixed, anchored, so Leto could have a safe place.
Wow.
Yeah, the sources really stress this change from wandering island to sanctuary. And the birth itself, usually it's under a palm or maybe an olive tree at the foot of Mount Cynthus. Lots of goddesses helped out, though Hera, well, she and Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, they weren't there initially. Bit of divine drama.
Always. And there are these details around the birth that keep coming up, like the number 7.
Yes. Born on the 7th of the month. They even had a word for it. Hebdomerginous.
Born on the 7th.
Exactly. And so 7 becomes his sacred number. Festivals, sacrifices, all tied to the 7th day.
That's fascinating. It adds this layer of, destiny or significance right from the start.
It does. And then, almost right after he's born, Themis, she's divine law, or she feeds him ambrosia and nectar.
The food of the gods.
Right. And it works instantly. He basically grows up on the spot, asks for his lyre and bow, and just declares, I'm here to reveal Zeus's will.
Just like that. As a newborn.
Pretty much. Imagine seeing that.
What an entrance. And Delos, the island itself, responds by blooming, covered in gold flowers. It's such a vivid image.
It really is. Oh, and sometimes you hear that Artemis was born first, and she actually helped Leto deliver Apollo.
See? Even the birth story isn't straightforward. Always layered.
Always.
Okay, so that's the origin. Let's get into his roles, because, wow, he did a lot.
He really did. This is where Apollo gets incredibly complex and honestly captivating. He's not just one thing. He spans this huge spectrum, and you see it in all his different titles, his epithets.
Let's start with the scary side. The Punisher, the Destroyer.
Yeah, that's a big one. The god with the bow and arrows, gifts from Hephaestus, the master craftsman.
And those epithets like Ulios, Argyrotoxos. They sound serious.
They are. Ulios points towards destruction, deadly power. Argyrotoxos means of the silver bow. And it wasn't just for show. His arrows, they brought sudden death, disease.
Like the plague in the Trojan War, right? Against the Greeks.
Exactly. That's maybe the most famous example, the idea that a god could just unleash that kind of suffering. It's powerful.
Definitely gives you pause.
And tied into this is his slaying of the python, the giant serpent at Delphi. He did this just 4 days after he was born, according to some myths.
4 days. Okay, that explains the connection to Delphi.
It's foundational. And there's this whole linguistic thing, too. Does Apollo come from Apollumi, to destroy? Or maybe Apollon, to drive away evil?
So even the name reflects the duality.
Precisely. It shows how complex he was perceived right from the start.
Because, the flip side is just as important. The helper, the one who stops evil.
Exactly. He could deliver people from the plagues he might also send. His oracles gave advice on how to avoid disasters.
So he had epithets for that, too. Like Achesios, Soter.
Achesios the healer, Soter the savior. These point to that protective, benevolent side. And of course, he's the father of Asclepius.
The god of healing.
The god of medicine himself. So that connection is deep. It almost makes you think, did they see the power to destroy and the power to heal as like two sides of the same coin?
That's a really interesting thought. Maybe you need one to have the other.
Could be. And then, central to everything is prophecy. The Oracle at Delphi, Pytho. That's his domain.
Where did he get that power? From Zeus.
Mostly, the sources say it comes from Zeus, though Apollodorus, one writer, he throws in Pan as a possibility. But either way, Apollo is the conduit. He speaks for the gods, reveals the future to both gods and mortals.
And getting Delphi itself wasn't simple either, right? Weren't there other claims on it?
Oh, absolutely. Mythology loves a good origin story tussle. You hear about Themis being there first, or the Python guarding it, or even Gaia Earth herself and Poseidon having a claim.
Just shows how important that place was.
Yeah.
Everyone wanted it.
Immensely important. That power of prophecy was hugely significant. Now, shifting gears a bit, but still totally core to him, music.
Yes, the lyre.
The lyre, which you got from Hermes, remember? Isn't that a clever tale after Hermes borrowed his cattle?
Uh-huh. Yeah, great story.
It's his symbol. And he's credited with inventing the paean that's a hymn, usually for thanks or victory, sung to him.
So he's the patron of poets, musicians.
All of them. Harmony, rhythm, melody. These were seen as gifts from Apollo and the Muses. He even gets called Homopollon, the director of harmony.
I love the image of the swans, too, being sacred to him. These elegant musical birds supposedly taking him to Hyperborea.
Yeah, and that mythical land in the north, it all fits together beautifully, this artistic, harmonious side. He's not just about war and foresight. He's deeply tied to culture, to art.
Definitely rounds him out. What else? Protector of flocks.
Yes, Nomios Deus, god of pastures. We hear about him looking after the amazing horses of Eumelus, the god's herds in Pieria. He guarded King Laomedon the cattle, too.
And the story with Admetus, tending his sheep.
That's probably the most famous one, yeah. Serving King Admetus, it adds this whole other pastoral dimension to him.
It's quite a range. And finally, founder of cities, civil structures.
That, too. He supposedly helped build Troy and Megara. He was called Archaegetes' first leader, founder especially for the Dorians.
So new colonies would consult his oracle before starting.
Very often, yes. Seeking his blessing, his guidance. Epithets like Tistes founder and Oikistes settler point directly to this role in organizing society.
Okay, so destroyer, healer, prophet, musician, shepherd, city founder. That's a lot for one god.
It is. Which brings us to another point of discussion. Apollo and Helios, the sun god.
Right, were they always the same, or did that happen later?
Well, in Homer's time, they seem pretty distinct, separate figures, but later on, you definitely see them getting identified with each other more and more.
So why? Was it always there underneath, or was it later ideas, maybe influence from Egypt, with their sun gods?
Good question. Arguments go both ways. His epithet Phobos, meaning shining or radiant, certainly helps the sun connection.
Sure, that makes sense.
And there are these stories about the Hyperboreans, that northern mystery people, supposedly worshiping him as the sun.
Oh.
Plus, later Greeks linked him with the Egyptian god Horus, another solar figure. But the fact they were separate for so long after Homer makes you wonder if it was an original identity that just got forgotten and then revived.
Sure.
Seems a bit unlikely.
So what's the other view?
Well, the scholar Miller had this idea that Apollo's core identity was really the averter of evil, and he was originally a Dorian god whose worship just spread.
Uh-huh.
In that view, the sun connection, or links to nature, those came later, maybe through cultural mixing, syncretism.
So maybe not originally the sun god, but he took on those aspects over time.
That's one strong possibility. Miller also pointed out it's weird for a primary identity to just vanish and then reappear centuries later. Maybe, he thought, the Greeks sometimes turn attributes into separate gods, which could explain why Apollo and Helios were distinct early on before merging later in popular thought.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about worship. Where and how was he actually worshipped? You mentioned Rome came late to the party.
Yeah, relatively late. No real trace in early Roman religion. They adopted him from the Greeks. The first temple in Rome wasn't until about 430 BCE, and it was specifically built to try and stop a plague.
Tapping into that healer aspect.
Exactly. And later, Emperor Augustus became a really big supporter of Apollo's cult.
But the main places were in Greece. Delphi, Delos.
Absolutely. Delphi and Delos were ground zero. But Lycia over in Asia Minor was also super important to him, and you see this reflected in epithets tied to places. Acraphius from Boeotia, Actiacus from Actium.
Delphinius, Pythias.
Right, linking him directly to Delphi and the Pythian games. Sminthius, associated with mice, possibly related to plays again, or maybe agriculture. These names are like a map of his influence.
And the healing epithets, too. Acesius, Paean.
Yes, Acester, Parnopius, which means locust driver, showing protection. Medicus in Latin contexts. It really paints a picture of people calling on him for specific needs, especially health and protection. The sheer number of epithets is staggering.
It really shows how broad his reach was.
And it extended beyond the Greek and Roman world, too. We see syncretism with Celtic gods, where Apollo gets identified with figures like Belinus or Granus, often gods of healing and the sun.
Wow, so he blended into other cultures, too.
Yeah, his worship was adaptable and really spread far, especially across the Roman Empire.
Okay, let's dive into some of the big stories, the myths. These really bring him to life, don't they?
They absolutely do. We touched on his birth on Delos, already Leto's tough journey, the floating island becoming stable, the swans, the golden flowers.
Yeah, such a dramatic start.
And the python slaying is another huge one. But like many myths, there are different takes on it. Euripides, the playwright, shows him as a child doing it.
A child slaying a giant serpent?
Yep. Other versions focus on him protecting Leto or avenging how she was treated. Strabo, the geographer, even suggested Python wasn't a snake, but some cruel local guy Apollo dealt with.
Okay, so multiple angles on that, too.
Always. And establishing the worship at Delphi that has its own stories. The Homeric hymn says Apollo turned into a dolphin to lead Cretan sailors there to be his first priests.
A dolphin. Okay.
The poet Alcaeus tells a story where Apollo initially didn't want to go to Delphi, but eventually did. There are versions where the Titan Phoebe or Themis gifts him the oracle, and sometimes Gaia, the earth, is in conflict with him over the site.
Lots of layers to securing that prime prophetic real estate.
You got it. Then there's his time serving King Admetus.
Right, the punishment story. For killing Python's kids or the Cyclopes.
Both versions exist. Killing the Cyclops was supposedly revenge because Zeus had killed Apollo's son Asclepius with a thunderbolt made by them.
Okay. So divine payback cycles.
Pretty much. But what's really interesting here is that some sources hint, or state outright, that Apollo and Admetus had a romantic relationship.
Really? Like who?
Poets like Callimachus, Plutarch mentions it, Ovid, Tibullus. Tibullus even calls it a servitium amoris, a slavery of love.
Wow. That definitely adds a different dimension to Apollo. Love. Obligation.
It makes him feel, well, more complex, maybe more relatable in some ways.
Okay, what about the Trojan War? He was definitely involved there.
Big time. He was firmly on the Trojan side, helped Hector, Aeneas, Glaucus, sent that plague we mentioned against the Achaeans, and famously
Guide the arrow.
guided Paris's arrow right to Achilles' heel, his only weak spot. So Apollo played a direct role in the death of Greece's greatest hero. Shows his power on an epic scale.
No kidding. And the music contests. Marsyas.
Ah, yes. The satyr Marsyas finds Athena's discarded flute, gets good at it, and foolishly challenges Apollo, the god of music himself, on the lyre.
Bad idea.
Terrible idea. Apollo wins, of course, and the punishment for Marsyas's hubris, his arrogance, is brutal. He's flayed alive.
Oof, that's harsh. A warning about challenging the gods.
Exactly. Though, interestingly, some versions say Apollo later felt remorse, maybe hung the flute, and Marsyas' skin in a cave.
Even the gods have second thoughts sometimes.
Perhaps. Or maybe it reflects changing attitudes over time. Then there's the contest with Pan, the god of the wild.
The one with King Midas.
That's the one. Apollo wins again, but Midas foolishly says Pan was better. Apollo's response gives Midas donkey ears.
Another lesson learned the hard way.
Definitely reinforces Apollo's musical dominance. And beyond these big myths, there are tons of others. He supposedly won a wrestling match at the first Olympics. Outran Hermes.
Really? Faster than the messenger god.
Apparently. He's linked to dividing the year, spending winters in Hyperborea. He purified Heracles after the madness where Heracles killed his family. He even renamed him Heracles.
Wow.
There's conflict with Heracles over a sacred deer, involvement in fixing humans after Zeus split them. He's just woven into the fabric of so many myths, even fought alongside Zeus against the Titans.
He really is everywhere in the mythology.
Which, naturally, brings us to his love life. And his kids. It's extensive.
Women and men.
Both divine and mortal, women and men, yes. A very long list.
We know Daphne, obviously. The laurel tree.
The classic unrequited pursuit. Then there's Hyacinthus, the Spartan prince he loved, accidentally killed and turned into the hyacinth flower.
Tragic.
Coronis, a mortal princess, mother of Asclepius, but Apollo had her killed by Artemis for infidelity. Cyrene, another nymph, mother of Aristaeus. Cassandra, given prophecy but cursed never to be believed.
Ouch.
Even connections with all 9 muses, fathering various children with them. And we mentioned Admetus, potentially romantic, Branchus, who he gave prophetic gifts, and the list goes on.
And the children are significant, too.
Hugely.
Yeah.
Asclepius, god of healing, Orpheus, the ultimate musician, Aristaeus, who taught beekeeping and cheese making. Lots of founders of cities, heroes in the Trojan War like Hector and Troilus.
So his influence extends through his offspring across the whole mythical world.
Absolutely. He's a generative force. Though, it's worth saying, not all his pursuits were successful. There were plenty of rejections, too. Even gods don't always get what they want.
Good point. Okay, symbols. What are the key things associated with him?
Bow and arrow, obviously. The kithara or lyre. A plectrum to play it, sometimes a sword.
And the tripod?
Yes, the sacrificial tripod, strongly linked to his oracle at Delphi, symbol of prophecy. The laurel wreath from Daphne, symbolizing victory, poetry. The palm tree from his birth on Delos.
What about animals?
A whole menagerie. Swans, we mentioned.
Yeah.
Ravens and crows, often linked to prophecy, sometimes bad omens. Dolphins from the story of the Cretan priests. Roe deer, cicadas, hawks, snakes.
Mice.
Mice, yes. Possibly linked to his epithet, Smintheus, maybe connected to plague or agriculture. Even griffins, those mythical creatures, each probably had layers of meaning.
And those pillars. Apollo Aegeus.
Right, those were sacred pillars, often placed by doorways, meant to ward off evil, protect the home. And he had a connection to the Ephebes, the young men undergoing civic and military training, rites of passage stuff.
So woven into daily life and social structure, too.
Deeply. Which leads us to how people have interpreted him beyond just the myths. Philosophically, psychologically.
Like Nietzsche, Apollonian versus Dionysian.
Exactly. Nietzsche used Apollo to represent order, reason, rationality, individuality, clear form, the Apollonian, in contrast to Dionysus, who represented chaos, emotion, intoxication, unity, the Dionysian. It's become a really influential way of thinking about these opposing forces in culture and human nature.
Amen.
Carl Jung talked about an Apollo archetype. For him, it could represent a tendency towards too much intellect, maybe being emotionally distant, overly rational.
Interesting. So he continues to be a symbol people use to understand things even now.
Definitely. His complexity makes him endlessly relevant for interpretation.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, it's clear Apollo is way more than just the sun god or the guy with the lyre. He's this incredible mix.
God of light, yes, but also darkness. Music and prophecy, absolutely, but also healing and plague. Order, and sometimes terrifying destruction or passion.
His relationships, complex. His worship, widespread, adaptable.
Yeah, and I think that duality is what really sticks with you. The same God brings the plague and the cure. The God of beautiful music also flays Marsyas.
Were there any surprises for you going back through it all?
Maybe the emphasis in some sources on the romantic link with Admetus. It's often glossed over. And just the sheer number of conflicting versions for key myths like the Python slaying or how Delphi was founded. It reminds you mythology isn't a single fixed story.
Good point. These different versions give a richer, maybe more human feel to this god, despite his power.
I think so.
So hopefully this deep dive has given you, our listener, a much richer picture of Apollo than you might get from a quick summary. Moving beyond the cliches.
Yeah, getting into the nitty-gritty.
So here's something to chew on. This fundamental duality in Apollo, creator and destroyer, healer and afflictor, musician and judge, what does that tell us about how the ancient Greeks saw divinity itself? Did they just accept that gods, like the world, contained these massive contradictions? Was divine power inherently capable of both good and ill, reflecting the complexities they saw in nature, in life, maybe even in themselves?
It's a fascinating question. No easy answers there.
Definitely something to think about. We really encourage you to maybe pick one of these myths that caught your ear and dig deeper, or look into how Apollo shows up in art and literature throughout history. His influence is huge. Thanks for joining us on the